right, this is, the writing is self-explanatory as I pass it, as you pass it around, pass along the magnifying glass as well.
Oh. I'm going to pass up the extras.
So where did you get this? From off the net. Yes. It's going to be the only alleged photo of Crazy Horse available. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Crazy Horse, not Crazy Horse.
The emphasis on horse.
It's like a first name and second name.
Okay. It's Crazy Horse.
Just like it.
So like he went by crazy?
Only to his friend.
Crazy.
Can we start with a question?
I suppose.
No wasting time. No, just saying, catch you before you get engrossed in your talk. When you were doing Van Gogh, you said, I think it was him, you said that when he focused and moved to a different part of the chart, to being a painter as opposed to being a minister, he did a lot better. Can a person looking at their own chart, like, decide to focus on a particular...
Yes.
But what if you're...
That's why we study astrology. We believe that we have free will and that we can choose from what's available to us to do our best.
Even if, like, your sun is in a particular part of the chart that you don't want to focus on, can you still...
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering about that. I kind of thought about that a lot and thought maybe it would be a good idea.
I don't know that he deliberately did that,
Yes.
but it is possible to do that. All right, this might be very short and it might be very terrible. What happens is that each time that we look at a horoscope, even the same horoscopes, we're trying to do something more than just look at a horoscope. We are trying to do a minor study in the personality, and we're also trying to do a minor study of something beyond the personality, or something that's involved, that the personality is involved in. And in this case, we have all kinds of options to do things that are not normally considered astrological. Now, in our culture, when we think of personality, we think of a personal style. We think of personal appearances in clothes and the things that are projected through the personality that separates that personality and distinguishes it from every other personality. For us, personality we treat in a way similar to individuality, as something distinct. Each person wants to have a unique look, they want to be special, and they want to be different, inwardly and outwardly. Now, it isn't that way in all cultures. In fact, this is a rather new development in evolution. At one time, the motivation was to be uniform. In fact, it was more than motivation. It was, in fact, almost impossible to break out of a uniform cultural look. So everybody looked very similar to each other. In earlier times, that was much more common than personal individualism. We have places where we can see that right here in the 21st century, right in Wisconsin, among the Hmong refugees. Not the second generation, but the first generation of refugees. The family, the clan and the blood consciousness is stronger than personal consciousness. It's so strong that psychotherapists working with Hmong find out that psychotherapy doesn't work for them, because all of our psychotherapy is for adjusting the individual to be happy and content with the individual. And their whole value is with the family. The individual is just a nuance within the family consciousness. So it isn't a chosen set of values. It is a matter of custom and a matter of conformity and even a matter of biological association. People like that belong to a stage of evolution where the self is only a part of a group self. And that group self, or that clan spirit, is the dominant factor in the consciousness. Now, this was the case also with the Native Americans when they lived tribally. Thomas Jefferson used to marvel, for example, at how little the Indians had to govern. They didn't have to have laws or law enforcement to govern themselves. He concluded, and he was correct in his conclusion, it was because they all had internalized a common set of values. I don't know if they internalized it, but they had a common set of values within them. Now, a lot of Native Americans in our society today suffer because of this. Change from group consciousness to individual consciousness doesn't happen suddenly. It doesn't happen suddenly in the individual, and it doesn't happen suddenly in the culture. However, change in society in the United States at the time that the Europeans were coming in and disrupting native ways, that was a very abrupt change. So many of Native Americans who still have the psychic constitution, still have the consciousness from the old ways, seem stranded. They seem lost in our society, and they can't really fit in. It's not because of not learning the lessons in school, right? It's because of their internal consciousness. You can get some sense of this if you read some of the writings of Sherman Alexie, who is a Native American from Washington, Spokane, Washington. He grew up on the reservation. He's a brilliant writer. He comes here once in a while and gives lectures in the theater about a little over a year ago. He's a very excellent writer, and he poignantly describes how the Native Americans, which he affectionately calls the Skins, have this old way of consciousness that there's no culture, there's no way that they can live that way anymore. Some mystics claim that, and as unpleasant as it is, this is absolutely necessary in the greater scheme of things, that old ways be broken up and people be moved on to new ways. It's good for everyone, even though there are pains in it for everyone. From this brief little discussion, we have something of a gist of the world and the consciousness into which Crazy Horse was born. He was a tribalist. He was much more of a tribalist than many of the contemporary Indians of his time. We're looking at the ascendant and the Cancer Capricorn axis is much more inclined to clan or group spirit consciousness than any other axis among the signs of the zodiac. Strong Cancer influences in a horoscope incline one to clannish ways more than any other sign. Having the moon in Cancer rising conjoined to the ascendant greatly magnifies all of these tendencies. However, we have to repeat it, that is not the only, and it's perhaps not the primary tendency of this individual. It's not him alone. It's genetic and it's racial. Having Cancer rising makes him all the more susceptible to it. You cannot separate the experience from the racial consciousness. He was, in his consciousness, he was a Sioux. And he was part of a tribe as much as he was the individual crazy horse. Without having a really well-trained seership, it's difficult to determine how much the racial factor was important in his life. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight.
Was he a medicine man in this tribe?
No. He was a defender.
Well, I knew that part. I just wondered if he also...
No.
Didn't he have some vision?
Yeah. Well, we're going to cover all of that.
Oh, that's where I was picking that up.
Somewhere in the next 5 years we'll get to it.
I was on the right track, though.
Yeah. So, he was, in his psychic constitution, he was connected to the collective spirit, much more than he was to his personality. In his character, in his expressions from the world, we can see what he is like from the horoscope, but it's very hard to differentiate that from the whole of his society. It doesn't mean that he didn't have a distinguished personality. It doesn't mean like he was a cigar store Indian, a wooden Indian or something like that, that he was some kind of type that you set aside. But it means that everything that was distinguished in his personality was very close to the tribal consciousness. So he sees himself as an extension of the tribal character. And he sees his personality traits as extensions of the tribal character. This is likely to happen to Cancer rising at almost any time. There's so much of the family thing that it doesn't want to separate from the family. To understand an individual like this, you'd have to have something that we don't have. We would have to have an abstract horoscope of the Siouan people. If we had the abstract horoscope of them, then we could see how his individual personality traits were extensions and expressions to that of the character of the people.
So when you do charts for people who are involved in that clan spirit, you really do need an overall chart as well.
Yep.
How do you do an overall chart?
You can sometimes do it by deduction, and every astrologer thinks their deductions are right. Deductions are intuitions. It's a tough thing. And there are all kinds of ways you can get at it. You know, like in political astrology, sometimes there's a chart for the people and another one for the when the nation was found or when there were articles of incorporation, things like that. It's a dicey business. So, in people like Crazy Horse, who is a transitional individual, coming from an earlier kind of culture You always have to do that. You have to see them relative to the whole. You can never be sure from just having the horoscope alone. It's like almost like if you're dealing with an animal, there are some things that belong to the species, and each animal might have its own little idiosyncrasies, but the species things are more important. In human beings, the balance between the individual and the collective spirit is much closer, though, than it is in animals. All right.
I have a question. It looks like the moon isn't really all that strong, or is it strong just because of
we're going to talk about that.
Because I just noticed that
it's the weakest planet in the chart.
Yeah. I mean, it's conjunct the ascendant.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So why would he be that, tending to be that clannish if the moon isn't very strong and
because
it's the ascendant?
We're going to if you wait, we'll get to all of those.
All right, I was just thinking. Sorry, I was just thinking about it.
Yeah. So
Rowdy students.
we always have to, when it comes to things like this, if a person is acting out of an impulse of the collective consciousness, then you have to weigh the responsibility that the individual has. What belongs to the individual, what belongs to the collective, and it's a really hard business. It is that way with all human beings, but more so with people who are very tribally oriented. All right. From all of this, it's safe to say that the case with Cancer and the moon rising in it indicate a psychic personality. And that psychic personality is psychically attuned to the tribe. And it's like an intimate family. For example, all of those legends about smoke signals, they didn't have an alphabet of smoke signals. They couldn't manipulate the smoke that well. What happened was, if somebody wanted to communicate with someone else, what they did is they started a fire, they sent up smoke signals, and somebody would see the smoke signals and say, oh, he wants to talk to me. They both lay down, and they would be in a psychic rapport with each other. The smoke was just like the ringing on the telephone. It wasn't the means for the communication, it was the means to let you know that communication was to take place.
Would you say that a trying, that something was like a trying?
I didn't say anything about trying.
You did?
Trying.
Tribe. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So, when we're thinking of somebody like Crazy Horse, he feels the suffering of the tribe. Now, Cancer, probably more than any of the other watery signs, is attuned to nature. So, when the Great Plains were being cut up and fenced and settled by people, it hurts him. It hurts him because it feels like he's being cut up. And it feels like his people are being cut up. When he saw great herds of buffalo slaughtered to no purpose than to keep them from running over the railroad tracks, and they were left to rot, that was an excruciating thing to him, because he was in touch with that. He thought it was absolutely insane. He was feeling that close to nature. When you see the prairie grasses mowed down and burned and then plowed, that probably hurt him in a way that was also almost physical. Cancer is a sign that loves wholes, especially biological wholes. Cancerian people don't even like the kids to leave home. They want to keep them home all the time. My grandmother was like that. The kids all had to fight to leave home and go out on their own. People with strong Cancer influences don't even like to delineate ideas. They prefer to keep them as whole. And if they can be put in a nice little sack, that's all the better. So, when a railroad let's cut the land up. And that was done partly for strategic reasons, not only for the bison, but for the Indians. It was like cutting him up personally. It was like cutting up the whole of nature that he thought was integral and was supposed to stay that way. Now, the attunement to nature was natural and psychic, but it's not necessarily a matter of personal choice. And it's not a matter of cultivation. It's not like Crazy Horse went and joined a school to learn psychic sensitivity or something like that. It's like this is a genetic thing to him. Now this is the way it was with all of the Native Americans, but for him, with Cancer rising and with the moon conjoined the ascendant, it was much more that way than it was for other people. Now Cancer does love the beauty of nature, and he probably had a very keen sense of beauty, not the same kind of beauty that a poet would have. The poet would be sensitive because he was detached from nature and had cultivated some kind of aesthetic sensitivity inside of himself. Crazy Horse was sensitive because he was connected with it and he was part of it, and it just isn't saying it in words. He lived it, like a lot of the Native Americans were Orothonians. They believed that they sprang right out of the earth itself, and that they existed because the earth existed, and the earth existed because they existed. They were absolutely necessary to each other. So the way Crazy Horse looked as nature would be more like the innocent child that was gazing into a mirror and saying how pretty that face was. No egoism, no vanity, but it was just looking and seeing how beautiful it was without any personal feelings about it. And that's something like the consciousness, like a childlike emotional innocence of with the moon and Cancer joined in that way. The sensitivity, especially as it came to the Native Americans, we'll talk more about it later, was often incapable of being spoken. Crazy Horse was probably not verbally articulate, which led to fatal understandings, in fact, even to his death. Because verbalization is a matter of delineation. And when something is delineated, that breaks up the integral whole. And so he wanted to be mute. He wanted to be almost dumbfounded, because to talk it out, he would lose that consciousness of the whole, and in a way he would be defiling that consciousness of the whole. Words interfere with non-verbal experience. And this is somebody that in his personality is extremely non-verbal. In his sensitivity to the decimation of his culture and the people who were an intimate part of himself, and in his sensitivity to nature, it was a matter of feeling. Cancer arising is a feeling side. And feeling attaches itself. Feeling tries to keep things whole. It wasn't even much of a sensory experience, and it certainly wasn't a thinking experience. It's not that he wasn't capable of thinking, or that he didn't have senses. It was more a matter of feel. If you tried to talk to Crazy Horse about the concept of empty space, or even of thin air, that wouldn't suit him at all. He's intimately connected with it all. He feels close to it all, and like he's part of it. This this is the way. I have a friend that I'm sure that in his past incarnation was a Native American. Because he's capable of verbalizing in this life. He'll be walking along and he'll see something in nature and he'll be able to explain it to you better than a naturalist could explain it. And it's just dead reckoning. He just intuitively went straight to it. And that's the kind of consciousness that Crazy Horse had. He's close to them. He's part of him. Now, in our astrology, when we talk about Cancer, we say that Cancer takes things personally. That would certainly be true for Crazy Horse, but the word would mean something different. It wouldn't mean that he was offended as a separate being, but that through his feeling, he feels offended for the people. He feels offended for nature. And it wouldn't be like a modern environmentalist. The modern environmentalist perceives nature and would have things to say about how this practice is messing it up and that practice is messing it up. He didn't have to be told about the balance of nature. He lived in that. He felt that. This brings about another key concept or key word about his personality that is a Cancerian key word, and that is sympathy. His relationship to the external world was sympathetic. It was not compassionate, because compassion is a feeling which one has for another that has some degree of self-consciousness and some degree of self-separation and some degree of deliberated self-understanding. Sympathy, such as the kind that he had, is such that making those kinds of distinctions would be impossible. This is also why people who are in sympathy with other people feel that they are closer to those other people than they could possibly put into words. So it's that kind of sympathy also. You're in the same place of consciousness when you're in sympathy as you are with visual consciousness. And that is non-verbal, and verbal activity breaks that up. One last little distinction concerning sympathy we have to make so we don't have a misunderstanding. Sympathy is to some extent independent of refinement. Compassion indicates that there's some degree of character refinement. One can be primitive and even savage and still highly sympathetic. And I think that describes quite clearly Crazy Horse. He was primitive, he was quite savage, but he was still highly sympathetic. His savagery was defensive, as there is defense in nature. It tries to protect things. You can't bear the ground without the ground trying to roll over and be protected right away.
Richard, what can you define savage?
Savage would be someone who would be rough and ready to go to violence easily. And primitive is somebody who is undefined, at a sort of, it means really original state.
Could you say again what you said about empathy as opposed to sympathy?
I didn't say compassion.
No, I thought you were thinking about empathy.
No, I haven't talked about empathy. Empathy usually is a more distinct form of sympathy. In empathy, there is almost like a special there may have been something like that. I don't know what I say. So, his sympathy was also bound up with the tribe and also bound up with nature. Now, it seems like a strange instance of poetic justice that most of the Europeans who were associated with deism in the religion, because that was the religion of the time, and being so associated with deism, they considered themselves to be to some extent outside of nature and beyond nature, and therefore they felt to do what they did, being deists like that. The ironic and the poetic justice about it is that's exactly how Crazy Horse and most of the Native Americans considered them. They considered them unnatural. They considered them outside of the bounds of things, and in a way they thought that was stupid, and they thought they couldn't understand it in the least. The moon in Cancer is in the 12th house, and the 12th house is one of the retreat houses, and that provides us with some insight into the nature of his personality. It seems to indicate that with his psychic propensities, that he is withdrawn from full physical experience. That doesn't mean that he wasn't astute or that he wasn't awake. He probably was keenly conscious. But his consciousness was not completely attuned to the external world. In his personality, he had a slightly withdrawn and inward consciousness. And that inward consciousness was probably better attuned to the world around him than if he had been only with the senses, all of which have limitations and illusions built into them. It's a fact that most of his visions came to him when he fasted. And when he fasted, that means he was more not connected to his body and withdrawn even more. And you always tell those sunken-eyed people that are fasting. Since we're doing some speculation in lieu of a dearth of biographical data, there are several other possibilities to cover with the character. Earlier we mentioned that Cancer was a personal sign. And at that time we spoke of taking things personally in a different set of words. The normal set of words also applies. Cancer is an excitable sign. With Cancer and the moon rising in it, with that, he is likely to take things to his personality and become very excited. The fact that Cancer and the moon, its ruler, have no other aspects, other planets, the tendencies to excitement are increased. There's nothing to draw off the exciting energy, or there's nothing to control and contain them. So in his personality, you have like a little ball of exciting activity. The Sun-Mars T-square is also exciting. It's a different kind of excitement. It's possible that since the Sun is involved, it was auto-excitement. And it could be sufficient to bring him to a state of internal clairvoyance. The kind of clairvoyance that he had is not the kind of clairvoyance where one is serene and peaceful and that one can control the subtle forces and see into them. This is much more like a frenzied state. You get excited, and that excitement hits the vortices whirling in your desire body, and you see. What we're saying here is that since Cancer is a defensive sign, and his defensiveness and his taking things personally and his excitability awakens something like an atavistic, animalistic vision. Just like an animal can look at another animal and sense that it's an enemy. And it's doing that with the inner kind of consciousness. And that is part of its defensiveness. A little dog, a little tiny dog can chase away a huge big dog. Because the dogs aren't looking at size and strength. They're looking at what's being emanated from the desire body of the other dog. If the little dog is highly courageous, it puts out something that has the big dog running. There's another possibility involved in all of this. Personally, I have seen cases where afflictions involving Sun, Mars, and Neptune indicate epilepsy. Epilepsy frequently occurs at the quickening. And at the time of the quickening, the individual who's coming to rebirth sees the primary images of the life ahead. And when it sees those, sometimes it tries to back out, pull away. And that's another form of Cancer retrograde motion. And if that pulling away is severe enough at the critical moment, a lurch action like that causes damage to the etheric brain, or it causes a misconnection between the etheric brain and the physical brain, and the result is epilepsy. Dostoevsky used to write all of his novels from moments of vision right before an epileptic seizure. Now, it's conceivable that Crazy Horse describes giving instructions or figuring out how to win his battles was done in that kind of a state. It's conceivable that he was perhaps epileptic and would have violent seizures of one kind or another, and preceding those seizures would be kind of clairvoyance. And it's a peculiar thing. Epilepsy, in many cases, can be triggered by a person taking things too personally. I had something like a shoestring uncle. My father was an orphan and was in a family at one time where there were my kids and your kids and our kids. Both parents had been married before and had kids from previous marriages, and then they had kids together. And somewhere in that complex of relatives, church-world relatives, I think they called them, was an uncle. And we were told as kids never to look at him, and never to stare at him. Because if you started staring at him, he would psych himself out. He'd get all excited, and he would become self-conscious in the wrong sense of self-consciousness. And then he could have an epileptic seizure just from you looking at him too much. He was a very successful realtor in Milwaukee, but he always had to cultivate a way of doing business with people without them looking at him too much. Same kind of thing. And that is a possibility. Since we're speculating about the possibility of epilepsy, the excitement over the decimation of nature, or the excitement stirred up seeing members of your tribe massacred or something like that would be sufficient for him to take it personally and for that to bring up epilepsy. There are other possibilities yet beyond that. The position of the moon in the 12th house indicates a preoccupation with the past. Cancer positioning of the moon in the ascendant indicates he may have had tribal memories right in his blood. That he could see images of past generations, past individuals in his bloodstream. The Sun, Mars, Neptune don't counter this view, and they mildly support it. Because Sun, Mars things have to do with the disposition of the blood, the hemoglobin, or something like that. I've seen cases of very severe anemia that were indicated by Mars controlling the Sun. In any case, he was probably much more in touch with racial memory than most of the people of his generation. So, again, when he sees the degradation of the people and the culture he loved, that would affect his sympathy. And a similar thing happening in nature would affect him similarly. The net result is, as we might guess right off from looking at the horoscope, almost any beginner would say, this is a very moody individual. He would have these moods, and the moods would not seem to be related to anything that was immediately happening to him in the environment, but maybe in the tribe, or maybe in the past of history, or in the sensitivity to nature altogether. His moods would vary widely, and they were without apparent immediate stimulus. They were all totally inward. He had personal tragedies in his life, especially with regard to love, but we'll come to that when we get to the emotional nature. And he had the weight of these spiritual experiences, the inner experiences weighing on himself. So there's no doubt that he would be a brooding kind of character, and he would be musing over things in his internal consciousness.
How would it be different? You said he's got the Sun conjunct Mars and square Neptune. How would it be if it was tri-Neptune?
Oh, there certainly would be tendencies to having problems with blood. There would be tendencies to epilepsy, because Sun Neptune has a certain amount of psychological control, which epilepsy doesn't.
Has no control.
Usually what happens with the people that have the epileptic condition and have some a blood condition, they come to deal with the situation by humility. And really was not just not very okay. It seems very likely that we would take things personally. The moon Cancer rising. And there's no doubt about the fact that people who take things personally, that when Cancer is involved with the ascendant and the 6th house and the 12th house, which ricochets into the 6th house, that he would also feel physical effects. Most likely, he would have upset stomach. Position of Saturn in the 6th house, with its strongest aspect to Uranus, would tend to refortify that tendency. It would indicate very upsetting things. There you have something very trying to hold things down, and another thing trying to explode. And that would also make for upsets. I've seen quite often that Saturn-Uranus aspect often indicates poor digestion, or digestion that is disrupted by too too many spices or the wrong kinds of spices or irregular or poor eating habits or something like that. So those are things that would come back to the physical body, to the moon in Cancer. The T-square of the Sun and Mars indicates rage. Rage is also not good for digestion. I find it myself when I get angry, I dare not eat for at least a couple of hours afterwards. I'm seriously angry. My whole body gets upset by it. If you are aware of your own personal odors, you'll find out that after you've been angry, your body odors change. And if somebody gets excitable as he was, not only would he get indigestion, but he would probably flurry of excitement and would have a hard time with anger and with the upsetting kinds of things from the Saturn Uranus.
Richard, what did you say the configuration was for rage then?
Sun and Mars. Even Neptune adds to it.
How would the Jupiter oppose the Sun and Mars? I guess it's part of the T-square,
yeah,
obviously.
I didn't address that intentionally because it doesn't fit into what we're doing. I'm bringing in a few things apart from the ascendant, but basically you have personal things in the physical nature. I don't want to go into all of the other things, but eventually we will get there.
That would make him pretty stubborn, though, with that fixed sign opposition.
Yes. We'll come into that, too. These are people. Yeah. So, when the Sun is involved, it means something that you do to yourself. And with Mars and Neptune, there is some likelihood to poisoning. And therefore, with the Sun, Mars, and Neptune together, it's probably some kind of auto-intoxication. My guess is that the most likely candidate would be urinic poisoning. Urinic poisoning would not come from weak kidneys, but from a diet that was too heavily kneaded and probably from taking insufficient water. As the moon and the ascendant are weak after all, and even though he's attuned to nature, he may not necessarily drink all the water that is necessary. All right, let's look at some other things. Capricorn rising is noted for having the stony poker face. It is also known for being very taciturn, very quiet. While those tendencies are not quite so pronounced, they also work into Cancer. But the motivation is different. In Cancer, it has to do with shyness. Cancer rising is one of the shy signs. In our culture, shyness and closed ways also indicate someone who is reticent about speaking. In Native American culture, the silence and the reticence is something different. Something that's very, very hard for us to understand. Now, you can speculate that if a society is attuned to nature, and much of its success at survival depends on silence, as in hunting, if you spook the herd of bison, they're going to charge off. Or if you are trying to get close enough to a deer to get it with an arrow, you have to be quiet. So to some extent, you expect silence in Native American culture. Now that probably had something to do with the background and with the cultural values of Crazy Horse, why he was silent, but it doesn't explain everything. This is also an observational society. where your life may depend on how carefully you observe. In our lives, we don't have to be real careful observers. Now, it's very difficult to be observant, even if you're observing psychically, if you are expressive and if you're talking at the same time. So this is another reason, if nothing else but by trial and error, somebody like this would learn that he could be quiet by being quiet, that he could be more observant, and that his psychic faculties would be more present there. That's probably another contributing factor to his silence, but that's probably not all of it either. All of pre-Columbian American culture, North and South, was illiterate. I don't think any of the ethnic groups in North or South America had a written language. They obviously had spoken languages. They didn't have written languages. It's not universally true, but usually it is true that illiterate cultures are less verbal than literate cultures. It's all speculation and guesswork on my part. I think it's probably because language is itself abstract. Because the words and the letters don't look like what they represent. And when a person starts developing that kind of abstract consciousness, there is so much more to speak about. There's so much more to enlarge upon. And it takes much more to describe something accurately. It's hard to romanticize and write poetry when there is a specific word for the green of buffalo grass. There's no abstract idea of greenness. It's a specific word for a specific color. Hard to be poetic about that. So it's probably that was a factor in his silence. Probably all of these things contributed to the closed and to the quiet ways of Crazy Horse, especially since he was so in touch with society or with his culture. There are other factors also. You can see this is a much different kind of talk than we've been doing, because we don't have all our data. We've got to come at things in different ways. Societies and cultures that are oppressed from without develop a defensive introversion. The Negroes in the American South didn't speak with the slave masters and the race of the slave masters. Sometimes they wouldn't even look at them. They were often forbidden to speak. But they probably wouldn't have spoken even if they were allowed to. Oppression one bears in silence. I don't know if you know who Paul Robeson was? Paul Robeson was a wonderful bass singer. He was African American, and he was very radical, very left-wing radical. But he left behind some beautiful singing, and if you can ever hear his singing, wow, it's a wondrous experience. There is a song that he sings that probably Mel Gibson would like. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And there are lines in there that go, and he never said a word. Well, I guess Mel Gibson's Jesus whimpers. I'm not going to go see it. I'm not that much of a masochist. So when you hear Paul Robeson sing that song, he understands what it's like to take oppression, to take punishment, and never say a word. When you hear that, you understand the silence of the oppressed. Also, when people are oppressed, they develop a language of silence. There's a tacit knowing, which is almost similar like the knowing that takes place in a conspiracy. So, with Cancer rising, and with the moon conjunct the ascendant from the 12th house, Crazy Horse exemplified all of these ways of being quiet in his feelings. The 12th house is probably the most oppressed house of the entire 12th. Astrologically, we can get at his silence in yet another way. In colloquial language, we say things like, I tried to get more out of him, but he clammed up. When the Cancerian clam shuts its shell, no one gets anything out of it anymore. It's almost impossible to open up the Cancerian clam shell without destroying it and killing what's within it. I've learned that lesson painfully by losing a couple of Cancerian friends. Clamming up is a defensive action, and it's a defensive posture. And it certainly is expectable with Crazy Horse because of all of the Cancer influences, including the rule of the ascendant being in the 12th, and all of the Taurus influences. Cancer and Taurus are without a doubt the two most defensive of all of the 12 signs. So, oppressed peoples are forced to be silent in order to survive, and Crazy Horse was like that. He was close to the people. He did bring out his individuality, indicated by the sun, which was very strong and very fierce. And he brought that into his clamming up. He was silently defiant. Every time they had him in captivity, it was like, you're not going to make me talk. I don't have anything to say to you anyway. You can see that he could satisfy both his intense martial nature and the closed clamshell at the same time. He didn't have to, go to war with people to do that. I wouldn't be a bit surprised with the Mars involved if it wasn't also an insolent silence, so that the water of Cancer was turned into something like acid. Astrological symbolism works into his personality in other ways. Because he was greatly outpowered, he had to fight defensive wars. And because of that, he would have used, or he did use, tactics that he wouldn't normally have used because he wouldn't have wanted to them. He had to conduct raids, which, though they were like buffalo hunts, were not completely in harmony with his nature. But even a buffalo hunt is in one way like his nature. When Crazy Horse had the opportunity of doing a full-out battle, he had one way that he liked to do it. He liked to use the crustacean-like pincer attack. He didn't like a frontal offensive. He didn't like flanking, but he liked the pincer attack, which is what you do when you work with buffalo. You separate off a group And you keep them separate from the others because animals are much harder to defeat as long as they're in a group. And so with that kind of thing, he was successful.
Would you say he epitomized his tribe in one person then?
Not in one person, but he was very much a representative of his tribe. I'm terribly curious tonight. So let's look at one more look at his moodiness and silence. Just to show you that there are all kinds of potential ways that this can work out, even if they all didn't work out. This is what happens when you have a weak planet and a weak sign, and you're flying dark. You know, you're in the blind. You don't know what's going on. I don't have all of the. I've looked at some biographical information, but I can only read so much at a time. It seems almost universal to not speak extensively about personal things just because they are personal. Most people, if they're normal, no matter what their society, they don't go on and on in detail about their toilet, at least not in public. Children who are very open and spontaneous often do tell tales out of the personal things of the family, things that adults find embarrassing because they're personal details that they don't want to be let out. For this reason, parents try to coach their children. That isn't always successful because the innocence and the spontaneity of little children is such that they innocently and spontaneously that they've been coached. They'll even go, why did Mommy and Daddy tell me that I shouldn't talk about your bad grand-uncle, for instance? It's that kind of thing. We have sayings that address this kind of personal shyness and this kind of personal embarrassment. They go something like, don't hang out your stained laundry for the world to see. It's usually considered very low to take your petty personal things out and put them out in the world. There's always a feeling of shame as far as expressing something intimate, especially if that thing that you are intimate with is something sacred, because to talk about it seems to be profaning it. And you don't want to profane something before the people who can't appreciate it. Show me a shy person, and the area of their shyness is something that they hold sacrosanct and they don't want it spoken of. Is your question?
Is it a known fact that he was shy and then he climbed up and it is a known fact?
Now the Europeans did consider the Indians dirty Indians. That's words that they used. And something like this kind of shyness was very strong in the personality of Crazy Horse. Especially this is indicated by the moon in Cancer in the 12th house. He was very much at home in a nomadic society. In some ways, the moon conjoining the ascendant is an epitome of nomadic consciousness. And then suddenly, there were all of these rude, uncultured, aggressive people entering your home, because the home was nature. It wasn't just the teepee or the hogan or whatever, it was all of nature. And they were defiling it, and they were despoiling it, and they were destroying it. So, with that, again, not quite in defiance, But before people like that, who's going to talk to somebody like that? Somebody who doesn't respect the land. This was common to a lot of Native Americans. They didn't want to talk to people who didn't treat the animals right, who didn't treat nature right. And so this then increased his tendency to be quiet. It was something like an attitude, I would guess it would be like, this is a family matter, and you don't have the right to listen in. Something like that is the way you would look at it. Now, we're going to a big side trip to try to get at this all from a little bit deeper and broader way. On the way back to the classroom here in the front room, there is a series of pictures. They are prints, and the originals were done by an etheric clairvoyant. If you proceed from left to right, that is from south to north, the prints depict the activity of the ethers in the plant kingdom from one new year to the next. At midwinter, the etheric energy is withdrawn way inside the seeds. It's withdrawn from nature into the earth and from each plant into the seed. If you continue moving up this way to pictures, you see that as it approaches spring, the seeds are activated and they start putting out little fields of etheric energy, or there are etheric energy fields that surround them. As spring comes on, they externalize shoots first and then roots a little bit later. And then the outwardness and the broadening effect continues all the way out until there is the opening of flowers. At this point, the etheric forces reverse their field. Instead of going ever upward and ever outward, they tend to close in on themselves. They turn inward and they begin the fruiting or the seeding process. And this also then begins to increase. The best of all of the energies and the best of all of the stuff is put into the seed so that the plant itself gets weak. We say that straggly plant is a plant that has gone to seed. Same thing, you make hay before the plants start going to seed because there's more nutrition in the stems at those times. Eventually, as much energy and experience as is possible is put into the seed, and in annuals the plant even gives up its life in the process. Now this is a cycle that varies from plant to plant and from climate to climate, but it's pretty much a universal cycle. It even has parallels in other things, like cultures. A young culture is outward and expansive. There are pioneers who are going out to break into new territory. An old culture turns inward. And sometimes it's even forced inward by expansive younger cultures. You see this even in stars. In old system, stars come crashing into the center. Now the case where an old culture is being crashed in on from a young culture is exactly what it was with the American Indians. Now we have said that with Cancer rising and the moon conjoined the ascendant from the 12th house, Crazy Horse was very much in touch with tribal consciousness. We've said that because the physical body is our association with the external world, and because of Cancer and the moon, he was also very much in touch with nature and very conscious of nature. Now we can see, taking this parallelism, though he didn't intellectually deliberate on it, with the sun, with the moon in the 12th house, he was very much in touch with the consciousness of the final stages of a culture in a cycle of culture. The moon in Cancer are the planet and the sign that are most cognizant of harmonies involving cyclicity. Now, his awareness wasn't pleasant, but he was aware of the implosion that happens at the end of the cycle. His people were forced more and more into a smaller area. And they were nomadic people. They would go for hundreds and thousands of miles and then be cooped up in a little area. It was not cool for them. He was aware of the extreme introversion at the end of a cycle and the collapse of a society. However, he is by nature a nurturer and a protector. That's what his personality is. And he can defend, which is also his personal nature. But in his personality and in his society, there's nothing he can really do. The moon is, beside the ascendant aspect of the ascendant, is unaspected. So it's basically isolated. And the rule, that means the ruler of the ascendant is isolated. Isolated in the 12th house. He can feel and he can sense outwardly, but he cannot make any sense of things because his intuition is not well integrated with his personality. His psychic abilities are, but his intuition is not well integrated with his personality. So, he's also witnessing the end of a natural cycle. Land that had been fallow from human cultivation for probably hundreds and thousands of years was suddenly being ripped up and tilled. In some places in the prairie, the soil, the topsoil, was 15 feet thick because grass kept growing on grass, kept growing on grass, and it held. There was no erosion with all of the grass roots there. It just kept building up on itself. There were 15 feet of topsoil.
More.
Huh?
More.
Not anymore, no?
About an inch of topsoil now.
Yeah. So the resources were being despoiled. The 12th house is the accumulation of wealth or the accumulation of things from past lives. So he is sensitive and harmonious with nature, and he's witnessing this, what he would consider a rape of resources from the past. And he's witnessing it with the eyes of a preserver. And again, his intimacy and sensitivity must have just been aghast at what he was seeing. But yet, he was in prison. He was in the 12th house. He was a prisoner of his own feelings. He couldn't do anything about what he was witnessing. His consciousness was attuned more to the past and to the present than it was to possibilities of the future. He had no idea of what Western civilization was. So he was dealing with a universal problem. But he was attached to the people. And he was attached to the past. And he had this tribal connection. So because of those attachments, he couldn't even see beyond what was going on. So he was sensitive to an undoing, and that's what the 12th house is. He was a prisoner, a psychic prisoner of the undoing of his people and the undoing of nature as he knew it. And to some extent, the moon in the 12th house like that, if he got excited, if he got churned up about it, it was like emotionally spinning his wheels. There was no progress, just spinning. So we can see that to him, the whole business, fight as much as he might fight, the whole business must have been terribly suffocating kind of thing for him.
Was there, are there any suicidal tendencies?
No. No, there's nothing suicidal in this personality at all. That's as much as I have to say.
With so much going on, you'd almost expect there to be some...
No. I don't think you could think that way.
Because of all the rage between Mars and Sun?
No, just because that was in his...
Oh, his tribal planet?
It was in his psychic vocabulary. You got all kinds of questions.
This was apparently an error, so I want you to look at this and see how that would, this is, because I didn't have your copy, and I want to see how that would change his personality around.
But this is a different place. This is not where he was born.
According to West Texas?
Yeah. I have his longitude.
No, it's a time.
What do you have at the longitude?
I have longitude, let's see, 102 west, 32 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm north?
34 north, 54 degrees.
Yeah.
And that comes out to Westlake, Texas.
Do you have LMT?
No LMT.
Yeah.
The thing that I don't have is I don't have the correct time, which is why I wanted you to look at it to see how that would change.
Yeah.
Originally, we had a different time.
This was a rectified time from events. It would change very greatly. It wouldn't be anything like the person you described here today.
I understand that too. But that's why I asked you specifically the question of, was it a known fact that he was in fact, that he would in fact climb up?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Stoic.
Okay, I mean, this was accidental, and yet I thought sometimes things just turn out, and that's why I asked you the question.
I think, Jerry, the original chart we had...
Well, that was for a different person. I think
it was at 8:29 instead of 11:26 or something like that. On the sheets that you handed out at the beginning.
I've got 11:26 as the time.
We have 8:29.
And
we have 8:29.
Right, but on these original ones?
Yes.
That you were supposed to
be in there.
Right. That's what is that what you're looking at?
That's probably where I got it from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what did you say that he didn't have intuition, as far as his personality, but he could have some psychic connections? Or
yes.
Where would there be intuition versus psychic connections?
The intuition would be found with Uranus or Neptune. I didn't say he didn't have intuition, but it just wasn't directly applied to the personality.
Okay.
It wasn't bringing it through. It was totally internal.
So where would the psychic...
Just the moon in Cancer alone.
Oh, moon in Cancer.
Very highly psychic.
Oh, okay. What about the moon trine Jupiter? Did that help at all? That aspect?
It's not an aspect. It's out of orbit as far as we're using the orb.
All right.
I had to take at that time I had to take what the computer offered me.
What about
his desperation inclusion on his
yeah. What about, you started to talk about, Capricorn rising versus Cancer rising? They're both, kind of quiet, or But how are they different regarding that? You didn't kind of say.
Yeah, I did. I tried to spend 20 minutes on saying the difference, at least on the cancer side of it.
Well, let's say he.
I gave 4 different reasons why cancer is quiet.
Yeah. But what about Capricorn rising?
When we get Capricorn rising, we'll talk about it.
Okay,
I just being difficult, but.
All right. I don't know, you started to compare it and then.
Yeah, I just use that as a way to work in. I think they call that, what do they call it, a segue or something like that?
Is it like the sounds being separate instead of being merged?
No, the motivation of Capricorn and taciturnity is altogether different.
It'd be more controlling.
What?
It'd be more control.
It can be, yes. Well, continue on. Let me know how you're doing with it all.
Have you ever done that before?
I've done 2 weeks.